Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth from Gibson's Bookstore, and I am very pleased to welcome two authors here today to discuss a topic that is very near and dear to my own heart. If you have not been able to tell from the last 2 years watching me, I am a very dramatic and zesty, shall we say, person, and a lot of that is because I am neurodivergent. I do have adult ADHD. I have known I've had it for a very long time. I was very lucky in the 90s to be a young girl diagnosed. This is not common. This was not common then. This is not common now. And we are very pleased to have this event tonight. Rebecca Schiller joining us from the United Kingdom. It is quite late where you are, and we're very glad that you were joining us here. It's not so late. We moved it forward an hour to have this event for you. You have a book. This has a different title in England, but over here it is just released, 1,000 Ways to Pay Attention, a memoir of coming home to my neurodivergent mind. I loved this book. This book made me cry a little bit. But in that good way where you see yourself on the page and you say, I am not alone, this is me. A little bit uncomfortable to see myself laid bare here, but it was wonderful. We are joined in conversation by New Hampshire's own Joyce Maynard. Joyce's book, I will also say the paperback of her novel, Count the Ways, comes out on July 5th in just a few weeks. Joyce also is recently reckoning with an adult ADHD diagnosis. The two ladies are going to discuss this tonight. Thank you to the both of you for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This is a
conversation I've really looked forward to, I have to say, Elizabeth and Rebecca in particular. I want you to describe the story. I have a million questions, but let's begin by hearing how you discovered, and before you discovered, what was going on in your life.
So I was writing. I'd started writing a book about my life on a small holding, a kind of a small homestead farm that we'd moved to in the English countryside, for a range of reasons, a range of stories that I told myself we had moved here. And parts of it had been great, but parts of it had been really difficult. And I wanted to write a book about...
And you had two young children.
Two young children, very quickly, a whole load of animals and seeds growing and work in all directions, and this sort of building feeling that there was something very wrong, that I needed to do more, but the more I did, the less that seemed to happen and the more chaotic it felt. And I started to really unravel, and as I was unraveling, because I'm a writer, I kind of started writing about it, and I kind of thought I would write a book about nature and mental health, and a nice simple book, 12 months on the small holding, observing things, and writing about seeds and how I was feeling. And what happened was something quite different, and I ended up writing a very different story, lots of stories, and also discovering during that time that I was neurodivergent and having to write about that kind of in real time.
Mm-hmm. So at the point you actually, you violated very successfully, I'll say, because I love the book, a general rule that I hold for myself, that it's impossible to tell a story while you're still in the middle of it. But you did. You did that at the point that you embarked on. And I know I've never heard a writer say this, but there are two very distinct versions of this book, evidently, that the one that we have in the States, and the one that was published in the UK before you knew most of this diagnosis.
Well, I started writing the book in earnest in January, February 2020. And the book tells the story of 2019 and the first half of 2020. I finished the first draft at the end of July 2020. That's when the book ends. So the UK version, which is called Earth, does cover the same time frame. It does cover my diagnosis, but I did have less time to think about that and reflect on that. And so the North American version we're talking about today, 1,000 Ways to Pay Attention, that from the beginning, I know it's a story of neurodivergence, but I still wanted to write it in the way I had all along, which is a mystery, because it was a mystery when I set out to write this book. What was it that was wrong with me, and also I guess what it was that was right with me, which turned out I think to be two halves of the same coin.
I'm thinking, because I'm guessing that there will be people listening to this conversation for whom this may resonate, whether they have been diagnosed or not. And I'll very briefly, our focus today obviously is on your story, but I'll share my own as one to compare. That anybody my age, I'm 68, was never tested for anything like this. It was not, the word was unknown. And so I went through 6.5 decades of my life without any awareness of this. I used to hear about kids. I remember when my kids were in school and I'd hear about kids taking Ritalin, and I had all kinds of judgment about, giving drugs to kids and so forth. And then I went back to college when I was 65 as an undergraduate. And I took my very first exam in 48 years, a French exam. I kind of fancied myself a good French student, and I was expecting to get my usual A grade. And the teacher called me up after class, and my grade was a D. And she said, I still find this astonishing that she was so perceptive based on one French exam. She said, have you ever been tested for learning differences? And just that sentence opened up the sky. It was not a shock. Although nobody had ever said that, and I hadn't ever thought about it, but the minute she said it, my life began to make sense in a new way. And I underwent, because I was an enrolled student at Yale University, I was able to have very high level testing that went on for months, actually, which ultimately gave me a diagnosis of extreme ADHD, reading in the 17th percentile reading comprehension. I'm a writer.
Well,
and things sort of covering my tracks in all kinds of ways for all those years. So I'll go back to you now and just say, or you and listeners, viewers, and say that there are generations who missed the opportunity for this diagnosis. What inspired you to actually go to a neurologist?
So I'd had some quite a lot of mental health challenges, and I'd had various diagnoses, and the latest one was clinical perfectionism, which my psychiatrist, I know. It was great. And so I was doing CBT therapy, which was essentially trying to convince me that the chaos wasn't real. It was all in my imagination, and if I could just ease up on some of my covering my tracks, I would discover that everything was fine. And I had a real sense of unease about this, but, I was a bit desperate. So I turned off all my reminders, and I tried to convince myself. And of course, everything went hideously wrong. I missed everything. I felt terrible. And at a similar time, I found myself reading very randomly an article that was written by 10 women sharing their experience of ADHD. And I, like you, it was one sentence. A woman was writing about her life as going to a carnival, a fairground, and her life being like going on this ride called the Mind Scrambler, where everything just keeps going round and round, and it goes faster and faster, and you can't get off. And I read that and I thought, that's how it feels. It feels like that. And
you should say that the painting that's behind you
Yeah.
is the basis of the cover of this book. Only the cover, it's like a fractured version. It's here,
Yeah.
which is a visual manifestation of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually the artist who painted this, Sarah Moore, was also diagnosed in her 30s with ADHD. So she really wanted to make the cover because she felt, you know, like it was something that she really understood. And so yeah, it was. I also realized, and I write about this in the book, that I had been camouflaging, covering up, doing this exhausting dance with every fiber of my being all the time without being aware.
I have to say, you know, Elizabeth opened our conversation with a question that tends to get asked at book events. And I always panic over this question. The question is, what have you been reading lately? And it's so embarrassing because sometimes the answer is nothing. Sometimes the answer is it's too hard. I violate every rule of being a writer, and that I'm not a well-read person. I'm a really slow writer. A reader. I'm a fast writer. I read my own books. And I'm really proud of having read this book.
Thank you. No, it's really, you know, it's very comforting to hear you say that, because I actually have a massive bag of shame about my lack of how I feel like I'm not very well read. I have a literature degree, and actually I read a lot as a child. I'm a fast reader, but I think I read in a very disordered way. I can't read for huge stretches of time, and I kind of can't access whole genres unless I couldn't read memoir for a really long time, and then suddenly something made me interested. Then I could only read memoir, and I couldn't read any novels.
I understand.
And then I go through huge dry spells, and I also panic about that question because also I tend to forget immediately.
That's what
everything I've ever read.
I forget, and this goes. We're not just going to trade symptoms, but I will say, you know, there are movies that I passionately loved while I was watching them, and then if you ask me what movie did you see last week, I won't know. And I'm sure, you know, if we looked at the particular ways that ADHD has shown itself in our lives, some would be very similar and some very different. Nobody would ever call me, you know, I'm a messy person. I'm not a perfectionist about certain kinds of order, but in other ways, yes, I can't get to sleep unless the closet door is shut. It's not OCD. It's just, I don't want more stuff to think about. There's so much stuff to think about.
Yeah. That there is that sort of, there's always everything.
Yes. Yeah.
And that, you know, that idea of oversharing as well, that which I kind of is one of the things that seems to go hand in hand with,
you know,
with
this
ADHD.
is kind of my bandwagon, because I resist the concept of oversharing.
Yeah.
What is appropriate level of sharing? What is undersharing? I mean, to me, sharing is a good thing, and being honest and authentic about oneself is probably going to be helpful, not only for oneself, but for other people who may share some of that. So good on you if you're sharing some things that are painful to share. I'm interested in that, you know, I want to talk about the farm and the garden and the animals and the seeds and the plants and their relationship to this. This is not two stories, it's one story, but you took yourself to the country. Actually, so did I. I raised my children for the early years of their life on a farm as well, and very similar kind of world to the one that you described long ago. My children are grown, but what was the relationship, do you think? Of course, at the point that you made that decision, and you made it with your husband, what you didn't yet know about this diagnosis? What compelled you to? What were you looking for that may, in fact, have been a way of meeting this set of the situation in your life?
I mean, I think consciously, it was 2016, there was a lot of volatility in the outside world. The place where
Brexit, right? For us,
it was Brexit,
Trump.
and you know, across the pond, there was some pretty intense political stuff going on in 2016, and that all felt quite linked. The place we lived at the time in the seaside, Nigel Farage of UKIP, who championed Brexit, was actually campaigning to be our local constituent, knocking on the doors, and it was a really odd, frightening time. I felt this sense of something bad coming.
You wanted a smaller world? Did you want to?
I think there was a bit of it that was shutting the closet door on all the mess.
Yeah.
You know, I think there was a bit that was running away, but I also felt this, you know, this sense that we were very cut off from. You know, I couldn't read a map properly. Couldn't grow a carrot. I couldn't make a fence, and I didn't believe in any way that doing those things was going to save me from some kind of you know, global apocalypse. But I felt like I wanted to be able to do things and to teach my children to do things and to not kind of feel passive. I wanted to have an active engagement with mine and my family's kind of survival and safety, because it felt like the systems were very fragile and that wasn't being acknowledged. And I didn't want to be reliant on a system that seemed so suddenly so precarious. And so I think that was certainly a big part of the intellectual reason. Though underneath, I think I was beginning to feel that pile up, that overwhelm of everything.
And how did it work? Did you succeed in calming down your world?
No.
I know some of the answers here, but
no, I mean, it in retrospect, obviously it was a deeply foolish and naive idea that moving to the countryside and starting to add in a large scale gardening and animal husbandry project would in fact make everything calmer. I mean,
well, I don't know if this is true for you, but I sense from your book that it is, that even as your brain is whirling with so many things that distract you, you bring in more things. And as soon as there's anything like equilibrium, one upsets it by bringing in another factor, another plant, another animal, another child, another, you know, cause. That's been a big part of my story.
Yeah, I think I've been really thinking about that in some of the therapy that I've had after post sort of diagnosis. You know, what's that made of, and is there a way of reframing it rather than it just being a kind of overwork and overdoing, and thinking about, you know, actually stasis, being stationary, is very claustrophobic for me. There is a place of relaxation. I don't know if you find this, that there is a relaxed, quiet place, but it's not about being static and held and confined. And so there's a need, if everything gets too stationary, I'm going to upset it.
Yes.
Because I can't bear it.
I found my twin. I knew it. I have certain things that I do. One of them is I make a pie, and it is kind of a calming thing. For some people, it would be stressful, but I'm very good at making pies, so it kind of I know the ritual. Another, oddly, is Googling real estate in some interesting place and looking at houses. Do you do that too? Yeah. And then I mean, these are houses that I'm never going to buy, places I'm never going to live. But if I'm really feeling stressed, I might make myself a cup of tea, or let's be honest, a glass of wine, and Google up some town. It could be a New Hampshire town, because I love New Hampshire. And I just look at houses for a while, and And in some ways, that is the nomad coming out. The where could I go? What might be fresh start, new perfect spot that I will then, or I will fix it up. I will redo my life.
Yeah, and I think that sort of nomad idea, which is it's something I find real comfort in, and I write about it in the book. The suggestion, the theory that ADHD is a sort of leftover trait from a nomadic time, and the best nomads, we were the best nomads, but kind of are not so good at the stationary existence, and that I find very and it actually makes complete sense to me, and I can see it not just in a like I want to move house or I want to travel, but in sort of the scheduling of my life. So if everything piles up too close to one another, I might have enough time to do it, but it doesn't feel like there's enough space to move, enough flexibility. I'm always craving, I think, in my life, pockets in which I can be flexible, because, a storm might come, or the animals might give birth, or there might be a fire. And so everything can't be so tightly scheduled and organized, because then I can't flex around the ever-changing environment and the horizon. And it's that need for spaciousness in my schedule. I think it is that doing more stuff is a kind of perhaps a capitalist approved way of doing that, and so maybe need to find a slightly different way.
If I have for years known that if I had an appointment to schedule, because my writing life, and I'm very disciplined about my writing life, and I have been for 50 years now, amazing number. It's what I have done. And my best writing hours are the morning. So I just don't make doctor's appointments, anything to see a friend. I don't meet people for lunch, because I need to have a span of at least 10 hours to feel that I can begin to wander around in my mind. Do you recognize that one?
Yeah.
So, I'll say to my dentist, well, do you have something at 4:30? And then I'll know I have the day.
Yes.
And even though we were meeting up at the end of the day, I knew this was going to be a different kind of a day. It was fine, incidentally. You didn't ruin a writing day.
Good.
But had it been a writing day, that would have been problematic, because I would have already, I used to, when I was really extreme in this. I remember one time years ago after my divorce, I had a very sweet boyfriend who would come and stay sometimes. And I got up really early to write, like at 4:30 or 5. And he slept in later, but one day he said, "Good morning" to me. And I got mad.
Yeah.
I said, please don't say good morning. I don't want to say good morning back. And then I don't want to feel guilty that I didn't say good morning. And I mean, these are.
But I think that what it takes to get to the place where you can really begin something, it takes me, I realize now it takes a lot to get to the place where I can really feel okay to begin something in the way, and to really get into it. And then I'm in it. I'm really in it.
Well, yes. Yeah. And let's say, before this is just a tale of woe, there are some gifts to this to this brain of ours, this way that we are wired. I have always felt that I had a kind of a superpower that I didn't know, whose origins I didn't know, but I now think they're linked to this, which is I can hyper focus. The world will disappear. And when I'm in my zone, and it's why I have a number of times written a novel in 12 days, because I was just, nothing else could enter that zone.
Yeah.
And then it was over. But I'm always seeking that kind of feeling. The wonderful climate change activist, the young girl, and I'm blanking on her name now.
Greta Thunberg.
Yes, Greta. She said one time that her autism was her superpower. And that really resonated for me. There are superpower parts to this. I don't want to be different from who I am. And I bet you don't want to be somebody other than who you are, right?
No, I mean, I think I do occasionally, but I think it's the bothness of it that is both wonderful and really difficult, because there are absolutely, for me, loads of the things that I love and I know I'm good at, and other people value me and I value myself, that are made of this thing. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't make the bad stuff any easier. Mm-hmm. You know, but also the bad stuff doesn't make the good stuff any less good. The two things exist simultaneously. They're made of the same thing. And I just couldn't be any other way. And I think that's what, for me, one of the profoundly important things about the diagnosis is actually the process of realizing that this isn't something I'm doing wrong, which I certainly spent decades thinking I'm just doing everything wrong, you know, and trying very hard to do it right, but that things are different for me, mm-hmm. and that's why it feels different. That's why that thing that other people do that they told me would be relaxing, I find maddening. It's not just that I'm really rubbish.
If I'm interested in something, if I am engaged, then, you know, there could be water pouring down from this ceiling right now, and I wouldn't notice because I'm loving this conversation. Yeah. But if I'm not engaged, I cannot stay. My daughter took me to a lecture on some very obscure, it was a nature topic actually, but it wasn't one that was resonating for me less. And I couldn't even sit in my chair. I was so restless. I was just, you would have thought I was 4 years old. And I finally had to just walk out because I was just I wasn't engaged. And I think probably my novels must be perfect for other people who have ADHD, because I'm writing for me. I am writing for a person like me. And I write books that I would want to read. So they work really well for me.
And for some, and I think that need for, I need a story, like a real story. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's one of the things that instantly I love and recognize about your writing, is that I don't have to get through the first 50 pages to realize why I want to read it. You know, you give that to me on the first page. And I think it's one of the things I felt really sad about. I loved reading as a child. Mm-hmm. I loved the novels, brilliant kind of middle grade novels. And I started reading some of my daughter's novels, you know.
Oh, this is what I need. You know, actually, to go back to that question that, you know, gets asked, what are you reading lately? It might be Kate to Camillo, you know, that's, I mean, and there's no shame in that. You know, I just reread Charlotte's Web. Those are stories that they're not simple, but my brain can get around them, and they're written, they're not abstract. I would be a disaster in a philosophy class, because I can't live in the world of abstraction very long. I need to have the real and the concrete. Incidentally, I'm just going to show you, because this might be an interesting thing for you to know about. Do you have a whiteboard by any chance?
I don't have a whiteboard.
Well, let me show you. Wherever I live, and I live in various places because I'm a nomad, of course, I have a giant whiteboard. This is my whiteboard. And very untypically, it doesn't have a lot on it, but it's really big. And I have a whiteboard wherever I am. And I make sure if I'm going to be somewhere for any length of time, I bring my whiteboard with me, or I have one delivered to me, because it's not enough. A computer screen isn't enough. I want it to be in front of me this way.
So you use that for your writing,
books, my life, my plans for my life, but definitely a book. And it's not an outline. It doesn't look remotely like an outline. I want to have something. It's not typing. It's not a file on a screen. That's not physical enough.
I might have to show you something in return. Okay. Just hold on a second. If I can find it. Talk amongst yourselves.
I've never had an author conversation like this.
I'm not going to be able to find it. My house is in disarray because we're redecorating. I can't find it, but I do huge pieces of paper.
Yeah.
With Post-it notes.
Yes.
That I move around.
I have every color of Post-it note, and I have. There's also a very large pad of Post-it. There's like a giant Post-it note pad.
Yeah.
Which is, and I buy those too, and then I can, especially if I'm staying somewhere.
I don't know if you noticed that the.
Oh yes, I did.
Post-it notes for the contents page, because that idea of there being open tabs in the brain, and I use the Post-it notes in that way. And I think also for me, and it sounds like it might be quite similar for you, I realized that I'm a physical processor. Mm-hmm. So I like to touch stuff. I've got various kind of things I've picked up, on nature walks that I
Me too.
Feel them. But that's pretty hard when you're a kid in school. Yes. Sit still, cross your arms, face the front, keep your hands to yourself, don't interrupt. And I think I would have learned much better in the things I struggled in, like maths, if I had been able to, if it had been noticed that I was that kind of a learner, and if because now I realized that I'm actually my son is really interested in maths and physics. I don't know where he came from, but he is. And I kind of got really interested in it too. And I have to draw it. Yes. And then I have to kind of roll around it, and then I can make its way through all the layers of other stuff to that bit in my brain. I was trying to find a physicist. So I write about a bit of physics stuff in the book, and I wanted someone to explain the concept of space-time to me, mm-hmm. so that I could understand it in the same way I understand a glass of wine or an apple. Like that's mm-hmm. how I want to understand things. Like I can hold mm-hmm. them, and I can bite them, and I can taste them.
Yes. And incidentally, to the people who are listening, we're going to be taking questions very soon, but I have to ask this one. So what did it do for you to have a name for this situation that you've been living with? What did the diagnosis, I'll just begin by saying that for me, it was very odd. I got this pretty significant diagnosis, this 10-page report on all the things that went differently in my brain. And then at the end, I said, so what am I supposed to do about this? Mm-hmm. And they really said just about nothing. They said, well, we can give you a prescription for Ritalin if you want. But you do speak about a drug.
Yeah.
And actually you mentioned that cocaine would have the opposite effect on a person. I haven't tried this.
No, and it was
a little expensive.
It wasn't an experiment I did. It was something that my psychiatrist, who was a sort of, if you were to write a psychiatrist, you would write the psychiatrist I saw. He was German, and he had a beard, and he had round glasses, and he wobbled in on a bicycle, and he was very lovely. And he said that cocaine often has the opposite effect, because it's a stimulant, like the drugs that the prescription drugs that ADHD people are often prescribed, and that if there's people are partaking at a party, the person with ADHD will sit down and read a book for the first time, whereas everyone else is bouncing off the walls. So I also haven't tested that theory, but I for me, the diagnosis, it's been stages of how it has felt. I mean, there was relief, I think, just to have something.
Yes. Yeah. That's, I would say, is the number one. I do not take, I was given a prescription for Ritalin. I haven't taken it one time, but I keep it. Who knows? Maybe there's some day that I'll decide to see what that's like. But I look at, in my case, I said to Rebecca before everybody else joined us, I said, I wish this book had existed, well, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. I go back now to situations in my life where things were really problematic. And I think, oh, that was probably the ADHD, or that, friendships that didn't go well. Times that I had real struggles with my children. And I think I wish I had known this now. It would have been a tool. And that's probably, for me, the most valuable piece.
I feel exactly the same. And I think I feel sad for the younger versions of myself at times for not having that information. And also for other people who are struggling to get diagnosed, not being recognized, because it's hard to, even with my extreme level of privilege, it's just hard to exist in this kind of brain, in this kind of world, and not understand the dissonance.
And I want to say, I'm going to make a plug for this book, and I really mean it, that this is not just a book. As it happened, I had a very particular investment in your story for reasons we know, but this is not just a book for people who have ADHD. I think it might, some people who don't know they have it might discover they have it, or they might have a child or a partner. I think, gosh, to be the partner of somebody who has it, is, it's important for them to understand. But it's also just a great story. And, we are all part of the world, and the world includes neurodivergent people. And I want to say that I loved what you said about, the stigmatizing of being different. Long before I had this diagnosis, I knew that I was different in all kinds of ways. But to have a diagnosis can make one feel sort of other and lesser.
Yeah.
And it's, I have come to embrace this. This is just my particular thing that I bring to the work I do and the relationships I have. And I have a strong guess that you, like me, are, a person, I bet, people love to have you over for a dinner party, and, you're good company and fun mother. It doesn't mean that we're sort of, staggering around the world, stuttering and drooling. We function, and it would be fine if we did stutter and drool, by the way.
Yeah.
We bring a texture and diversity that's important. I mean, it's important in all forms, and this is one.
Yeah, I think there's a whole load of assumptions and myths in every direction about neurodivergence, and of course it is, by its very name, a divergent area, and I think that complexity of being, I'm very lucky that I've been able to mask, and I've been able to get through stuff, and I've been and there have been times where actually things have been awful, and times where everything's been great, but just because I do this, I one of the things I write about in the book is a psychiatric nurse triaging me on the phone when I was in a really dark place, saying that they'd Googled me, and it seemed like I was doing fine, so they weren't going to help me, and they were like, I hope you don't mind, I Googled you.
You were functioning, as I always have too.
Yeah, I've written some stuff. I was, I ran a charity. I'd written a thing, a couple of, there couldn't be anything wrong. And that I found incredibly difficult to come back from, being in that moment of extreme distress. And I'd done too much, I'd shown I was coping too much, and I wasn't going to get any help, and I wasn't coping. It's that moment where, the moment between unraveling and being able to do a talk to 300 people, there's half a second between those moments for me. you know, and I think that is something that people find quite hard to understand.
Put a lot of energy into doing what you do. So do I.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm looking at the time, and I'm
Yes.
actually, I've been so focused on our conversation that I haven't allowed myself to look at the questions that have been coming in. But I see Barbara Carr has self-diagnosed, and she says, now I'm 80, life would have been a lot more fun and easier if I'd known decades ago. We are fun, interesting, and intense. Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to be somebody other than me. I just want to be me, having the insight to deal with things that are difficult. And that part is a relief. But by all means, send us your questions.
So I feel like we need t-shirts with Barbara's slogan: fun, interesting, and intense.
Elizabeth, I noticed that you were weighing in yourself.
I have so many notes that I want to talk about so many things, but we don't have a tremendous amount of time left. I'm all over the place here. Some of them I've already forgotten why I wrote down the thing that I wrote down. I loved when you remembered when you mentioned the cocaine used as self-medicating, because many ADHD medications are stimulants. They stimulate a lagging organ in the brain, which is lagging behind what a neurotypical person's function would be. So they bring us up. I remember being a child and my mother saying, you can't have soda, you'll fall asleep. I remember learning that one of the first signs that an adult is ADHD is the amount of coffee that they drink. ADHD medicate with coffee because it is a stimulant, and they're just like, oh, I've only had 8 cups of coffee today, and everybody else is like, why is your heart not bursting out of your chest? And they're like, no, I'm about to fall asleep. It's a stimulant and it has the opposite effect on us. I have so many things that I want to talk about with both of you right now. But what I think I will start with, first, I will mention that 1,000 Ways to Pay Attention is available from Gibson's Bookstore. And in the sidebar, you should order it, you should read it, you should cry over it, and it's amazing. And I'm very much enjoying everybody in the chat sidebar saying how validating it is to see other people talking about this and that they're not alone. What I want to talk about is naming the beast. As you mentioned, getting that diagnosis. Part of getting a diagnosis is that you can learn about it. You can utilize it as a tool. You can see, all of these lists of life hacks and organizational tips aren't going to work for me because my brain is blue and theirs is orange. It's not the same. I have learned, as I mentioned early in the event, I was diagnosed very early. Unfortunately, they didn't keep up with telling me what that meant. As I grew up, they didn't check back in with me and say, hey, now you're 16, now you're 20, now you're 25. Here's a bigger and better understanding of how your brain works. They kind of told me when I was young, they treated me they didn't really know a lot about treatment back then. So there wasn't a lot they could tell me, but they never updated my understanding. So it was in my 30s that I was learning about things like time blindness, object permanence, all rejection sensitivity, dysphoria, all of these things that colored my life.
I don't know. Okay. I probably know them and I just don't know the names for them.
So I'll very briefly for you, Joyce, and for anybody who's watching this, who's saying, wait, tell me more. Time blindness is that our brains do not process the passage of time in the same way that a neurotypical person does. When you're sitting there and you're just like, well, I have to leave in 6 minutes, but okay, I have 6 more minutes. That's enough time to do eyeliner. And suddenly you are trying a new eyeliner technique, which is a terrible time to do this. Don't do this. Or you say, I have enough time to water all the plants, because you try and fill that time. Well, it doesn't take 5 minutes, it takes 8, but you've misjudged how long it takes to do this because you can't process the passage of time in your head. Or you're going along perfectly fine, and then you kind of forget that, like, you start picking off the dead leaves and all of a sudden you should have left 3 minutes ago. That's time blindness. It's just you are not processing the passage of time. I didn't know this about myself, but I did know that I had to set an alarm to go off every 5 minutes when I was getting ready for work in the morning. Otherwise, all of a sudden, I would have spent 15 minutes picking a shirt. Object permanence, not the literal object permanence and like that a baby, when you cover something and then they think it literally disappears. And then that's why peekaboo is so funny for babies, because they think, oh, you've disappeared. Oh, there they are again. If we don't see something, it literally kind of disappears from our head. That's why I also, by the way, Joyce, have a giant whiteboard. We take all of our notes by hand. We have notes everywhere, because when we don't see something, poof, it's gone. I personally organize my world visually. I have a lot of bins and translucent organizers so that I can see what's in it. If you put it in a drawer, it's gone. It's gone. I've learned that I should put my produce in my free refrigerator drawer, because because if it goes in the crisper drawers, it's gone from my mind. And then
that's a good tip.
That's good, because the person who taught me it, they put their condiments in the crisper drawers, because they say, when you want mustard, you're going to go get mustard. But if you forget that the carrots exist, they're going to go bad. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is we feel our emotions very large, and any perception of rejection hits us so much harder, which was very hard for me to understand why I felt social rejection so much harder, especially because I was the weird kid. But knowing that it was my brain and not a moral failing was such a relief to be like, oh, I'm feeling these emotions very large, but that's because of my brain, not because I've clung so hard to this person. Oftentimes people with ADHD, of course, are corrected their whole lives. Like, don't do this. Why aren't you sitting still? Can you do this? Why are you being lazy? All of these things start to pile. So anytime when we're older, someone starts to criticize us again, it's all that childhood trauma coming right back up. But that's rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And that blew my mind. I'm monologuing, so I should probably.
One of the things that I wanted to be sure that we touch on in this conversation, because I don't want to pathologize this condition. It's a different lens to see the world and to live in. But I so loved, Rebecca, the way you experience the natural world, and there are plenty of people who care about the natural world who do not have ADHD too. But can you talk a little bit about the relationship for you between how your brain works and how your garden grows and how you
there's so many, of course, because everything is everything, but partly the garden is a lesson, and a way of learning things that I've struggled to learn elsewhere. So sowing the seeds is patience.
And it's physical, isn't it?
It's physical. I take the seed and I touch it and I hold it in my hand and I press it into the soil, which is damp. And then this is perfect for ADHD people. Then something magic happens. Something is going to sprout. I just have to wait. And I started with seeds that germinated quickly. And now I can do seeds that take 6 months to germinate. Like, that's how it's taught me to wait, to be able to wait.
You'll really have graduated when you grow asparagus.
Well, I inherited an asparagus bed, so I am so grateful to the woman who planted it for me, because now I have asparagus and I didn't have to wait, which is the greatest gift. But yeah, it's a physical, and it's also a sensorial experience. So I realize I have sensory stuff, particularly around artificial light and noise, apart from baby goats bleating and very loudly, and baby birds. I find that quite difficult. It sets off my maternal alarm bells. But apart from that, the sensory experience of being outside on the plot is like a kind of a gong bath for, you know, one of those brilliant immersions in things that soothe me from the other sensory experiences of the day.
How does you're living a family life, which I used to, and I was writing throughout my family, raising of my family, but I live alone now. But how do you manage to do the work that you do? And you wrote this book very fast too, while you are living the life of a family of children who are needing school, work, help, and drives to football games and all kinds of things, and making meals and shopping. And how do you combine? Because I know for me, it's, you know, those were big challenges to,
Yeah.
I would have to physically remove myself. A few times I just checked into a motel for a couple of days to work. And because I knew I couldn't be gone long, I would work, you know, nonstop, and I got a lot done. But how does that work for you?
I mean, when I wrote the original version of this, it was lockdown. So it was incredibly difficult because I couldn't go anywhere and the kids couldn't go anywhere. We moved the house around so that I was working in the room that was furthest away. I had a purple sock that I would tie on the door that meant, if you come in this room, I will be horrible to you. And I, you know, they soon realized that was, you know, that was true, unfortunately. It just had to be that way. I do remove myself. I run writers' retreats, and I do quite a lot of my own writing when I run the retreats. It's a double whammy. It's very lovely. And I tend to go. I also have checked into Airbnbs for 3 days because I do also need to hyper focus. I need nothing else.
Yeah.
That bit when it got to come together, I need to be able to see the whole book. And
Those
I can only
who write in Starbucks or whatever the equivalent is in the UK, I cannot imagine. I want, I do like to have a window, but actually I want to have as little. I can't imagine playing music while I wrote. I like to play music before to get myself in a mood, but I must have nothing else going on.
Yeah, I really understand that. And I think that's of course a challenge if you've got young kids. So the bit that I think it just creates more stress. I can do the work. It's just hard when it's in the midst of the family stuff. But I think I'm getting more used to it. Also, the children are getting older as they do, which
I'm just reading a comment by, this is actually a writing student and friend of mine, Beth in Connecticut. She says, "This is so incredibly helpful in normalizing my own behavior. I will have to find words to help explain this to my children." I think I'll just say to you, Beth, although this is not, well, your children are older too, so I think they could read this book, but you do not, this is not a book about ADHD. We get to see the world through the eyes of someone who is living with it. And we see you going down all those rabbit holes and getting distracted, as I do too. We haven't talked about Google and the internet, but if I'm reading one story in the New York Times and then there's something mentioned in that story that is of interest, I'll go off, and then I usually have about 30 different tabs open on my computer because I'm going here, going there, going here.
Yeah.
And I need to constantly sort of shut it down. I do actually sometimes close off the internet. I have I have a program that it's like that drug that people take if they don't want to drink. I can't think what that's called, but
you have that for the internet. Wow.
Yes, it's called freedom. It's called freedom. You shut it. And there is an emergency remedy if you need it. Or I just go put myself in a place that has no connection and no internet connection. And that's very helpful.
Yeah.
We have a question here from audience member Alex, who asks, how long did it take y'all to find a way of doing your life that actually works for you and that feels manageable? Have you found a new normal since getting a diagnosis?
Ooh.
Any day now. Well, my diagnosis was 2 and a bit years ago. I'm not sure when was yours more recent than that, Joyce, or about the same time?
No, it was about three. It was about
Okay.
3 years. I don't think it's not like you reach a normal and then you just sort of are there. I mean, my experience, I remember when I was younger thinking I'll get to a certain point and then everything will be understood. And I haven't got to that point yet. So one constantly evolves and one's circumstances change, and so you adapt to them. But I would say it's not that there's some magic tip or tricks that we have. It's that we know ourselves and then we forgive ourselves and we are gentler with ourselves. I will always remember I was there was a reporter from, I think it was the Boston Globe, had a feature of calling up writers to ask them what books they were reading at the moment. And I have these periods where I just can't read. I cannot focus. It's usually when I'm reading and I'm so completely consumed by my own work. So it was during one of those times, and she called me up and I went absolutely blank on, I couldn't think of a book that I'd read in 6 months. I had read a couple of books in 6 months, but couldn't think of them. And so I named some books that I loved from years before. And she said to me, oh, the last time I interviewed you, which was like 10 years before, you named those same books. I said, because I was still trying to cover my tracks, I said, oh yes, I love to reread books that I love. I don't do that anymore. So in answer to you, Alex, I just accept myself. And I mean, I think this is what I've done about other aspects of my life. What is the big shame in just saying who you are? Are we the only ones who have a little weirdness in us? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
With the person who has nothing strange or different going on in their life, please click off right now. This, we all have, well, we're going to click off soon anyway, but not quite yet.
I have found myself, if I may, it's the same, is that you're constantly learning new pieces of yourself and learning about yourself, and then giving yourself the grace to say, okay, this is how I am. If I spent so many years trying to be neurotypical, trying to be normal, and I will never be that, and masking myself and putting so much energy into trying to reach this, it's never going to happen. But I will, like, the way that my brain works, you can lean into it. Sometimes I have very clean windowsills right now because the other day I needed to get a specific work task done and it was not happening, but I suddenly felt the urge to scrub all my windowsill tracks. They're sparkling.
Well, there is that too, that sort of, it's very comforting sometimes.
I think that being able to work with something rather than against it is a huge advantage. And the other thing that has helped me is realizing that asking myself when I feel bad about something or I'm trying to change something, whether rationally the thing is bad. So tidiness versus untidiness. Is there anything morally wrong with untidiness? Now, I might have feelings about it, very complicated feelings, but I can be sure that morally there is nothing wrong with untidiness. And that helps me position myself again as someone who has struggled with something, but not because it's necessarily bad. I don't need to feel bad about this thing. Maybe I could just accept that sometimes sometimes it's messy. And sometimes I need to be tidy. Sometimes I need to be tidy, and sometimes I need to be messy, rather than trying to make myself always tidy or always accept that I'm messy. I just sometimes need to be both of those things at different times, and neither of them is better.
I love that. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I was that mother who crept into her son's bedroom in the middle of the night and sorted the Legos by color. But I also, nobody is messier in a kitchen when cooking.
Could you come and sort our Legos out, Joyce? Please. We really need you.
Listen. And there's that illusion when you do that the world is, this we can attend to. There are so many things we can't.
Yeah.
And we certainly know, whether we have ADHD or not, that there are so many things in the world right now. Today is a good example that we feel powerless. So what can we do? We're trying to, in our small corner of it, make some sense and create some peace. And there was enormous wisdom in this book for me. I know, Elizabeth, I don't know if we can do this because I see it's a few minutes after 7, but I would so love, the writing is so beautiful in this book. And I bet, Rebecca, there's a paragraph that you might read out loud. Is there a little passage from this book that you could share, just so we know this is so not a book of a kind of a dry report on ADHD, that I want listeners to really just hear Rebecca's writing voice.
While Rebecca's looking for that, I want to just comment that disability exists within the context of society. And 150 years ago, Joyce, you sorting Legos, you would have been sorting berries in a village, from the bad berries and the good berries. These instincts that we have are inherently productive. And they would have been so useful 150 years ago in a pre-industrial society. I have a spinning wheel behind me.
I was noticing that.
I am a very prolific reader, but what most people don't know is that I can only do it if my hands are busy. I have literally a master's of library and information science. And I could only read my textbooks or only read a novel if I'm knitting at the same time, or shelling walnuts, or doing something. I cannot sit still unless I am doing something with my hands. My child now, I have a 5-year-old daughter. We had to get her a big elastic band for the legs of her chair. She won't sit still, but someone just commented that they're knitting a sock while they're at this event. And I do sometimes knit. I have perfected my arms not moving underneath, my shoulders not moving underneath the camera frame, but I've been knitting.
I think what you said is so important too, Elizabeth, because we need to recognize all those children who can't sit still. And I was the mother of one of them, who, they're not problem children. They're just children who are so stimulated by the world that whether or not they have an official diagnosis of this, there is something in their brains that calls to them to keep themselves, where was it written that a 5-year-old was supposed to sit in a chair for 6 hours a day? It's not a very natural thing. And so, my gosh, I draw. Well, I can't sit still without drawing, and that's my thing.
I have a friend who's a hairdresser. At hairdressing school, they put fidget toys on the desks because people who work with their hands are not going to sit still for a class on how not to burn somebody with perm chemicals.
I bet Rebecca has her passage. I'm looking at her.
But
I do.
And I also want to mention that hyperactivity, which is one of the hallmarks of it in boys, often presents in verbal hyperactivity in girls.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I think you could maybe characterize the bit that I'm going to read about as mental hyperactivity, though I've decided to rename hyperactivity for myself as I need to move a lot. So this is towards the beginning of the book. I've had a really bad day, and I go outside. I've got some huge oak trees, and I decide to measure one of them to see if I can work out how old it is. And I measure it, and I discover that this tree I have been ignoring is 335 years old. It has been growing here since 1684. I take it, this direct link that feels like a way out, and travel from the sharp pieces of now to when everything came together then, piecing together those perfect moments that followed the acorn's fall. The year 1684 has become a gap that I need to fill. Inside and on the internet, I click, skim, highlight, and soon have 20 tabs open. This feels like a safe place to get lost. Nothing in 1684 can be my fault, and no one from 335 years ago is expecting my call. I feel free to spread out across the year, and as I do, I find scraps that might fit together if I find enough of them. The acorn's taproot began to tunnel under the earth as England struggled through the coldest winter in living memory, and a little ice age gripped the land. South from here, in Romney Marsh, the Anopheles mosquitoes' malarial bites were stopped for a short while by the chill, and the sea froze for 2 miles towards France. In Paris, poet and philosopher Anne de Lavine took one last breath before dying, supposedly of sheer devotion to studying a world she had challenged with her words, thoughts, and gender. And eastward from her deathbed, Pope Innocent XI gathered a holy league of nations and ushered in the Ottoman Empire's defeat.
Oh, I love to hear it read. You know, I read that passage, of course, but there's a particular joy in hearing it from the lips of the writer.
And I like to read it.
You do it well. You do it well. I have to just quickly note, one of my favorite readers, Amy Persicchini from Kansas City, wrote to say she's actually sent a link to a chair that is designed for wiggly kids. So you might
wow.
look that up.
I wish
Great.
I had these when I was a child. And I'm so glad we have them for the future generations.
And I'm so glad we have this book and this writer, and something tells me there will be much more from her. Maybe one day we'll meet in the UK, Rebecca. I would love that. Or you'll come here.
That would be great. Or anywhere else.
Great.
I'm keen to travel.
All right.
And I want to be sure, Elizabeth, will you let everybody know when I'm going to be at Gibson's in real life?
Yes. So Joyce is joining us at Gibson's on May 12th at 6.
No, I'm not. On July 12th.
May 12th. May 12th was 2 weeks ago. But it does have meaning when we are scheduling an event. It is in July 12th at 6:30 p.m. for the paperback of Count the Ways. We're very excited.
Just out in paperback then.
The hardcover is available from Gibson's, or you can pre-order the paperback. If you can't make it to the event, I'm sure Joyce would be happy to sign a copy for you.
I will.
We also have 1,000 Ways to Pay Attention, a memoir of coming home to my neurodivergent mind. The publisher mentioned in the chat to me that they're happy to send us signed bookplates. To anybody who orders from Gibson's Bookstore, we will get them out to you. Rebecca, Joyce, our audience members, I think we all need to start a support group, where we can all share all of this. This has been one of my favorite author events.
Me too. Me too.
It has been so much fun. I don't want it to end, but we all have things we need to do, windowsills to scrub and walnuts to shell and books to read. And Rebecca, it's probably midnight where you are, so we need to.
I've got to paint some more walls.
You can't just to stop a project in the middle.
And I'm going to go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So to everybody who joined us from home, thank you so much. Thank you, Joyce, for joining us. Rebecca, thank you for joining us across the pond. So lovely to talk to you. And I kind of want to do this again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye. Thank you.